Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis. Starting Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph, 5 lines from the bottom. The sage from Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan, shares with us the following 3 teachings. Rabbi Yochanan, Shloisha Menoich Le Ha'olam Haba. There are 3 who inherit Olam Haba. Elu Hein Hadar Be'eretz Yisrael, one who lives in Eretz Yisrael. V'hamegadel bonav l'talmud Torah, one who raises his children and teaches him Torah. V'hamavdil al hayayin b'motzoi Shabbosos, and one who makes havdalah on wine on Motzei Shabbos. Maihi asked the Gemara on the latter teaching, why is this one noichel olam haba? Says Gemara, the Meshaya mikidush la'avdalosa. He takes the kiddush. In other words, he doesn't have any wine left over, and therefore he takes that which could be used for a Su'udah from after he made the original Kiddush of Friday night, and instead of enjoying it on the Su'udah of Shabbos, he leaves it special for the mitzvah of Havdalah. Rabbi Yochanan goes on to teach us Shloisha Machriz Aleim HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Kol Yom. There are 3 things HaKadosh Baruch Hu he announces with a shevach, with a praise, every single day. Al haravak hadar bekrach ve'ino choite. The first one is a person who is a single individual. He's not yet married, a bachelor, and he lives in the metropolis, and he doesn't sin. The second thing, val oni hamachzir aveda leba'aleho. And oni, despite his difficulty with parnasa, he finds a lost object, and instead of keeping it for himself, he returns it to its owner. Val ash osher hamaser peiroisav bitzino. The osher, instead of getting kavod, he does look for his kavod, but rather, even in a place of secrecy, he is meiser his peiros. Rav Safra rovak hadar bekrachavo. It tells the Gemara that Rav Safra was a bachelor, and he lived in a metropolis. Kuf Yagimam at Beis at the top. Tani Tanaka made Rabbi Rav Safra. A similar brisa was taught in front of Rava and Rav Safra. Tzahavoy Ponov de Rav Safra. Rav Safra, who was this bachelor, his face gleamed with joy. Omar loy Rava. Rava said to Rav Safra, Lav kigoin mar. This brisa is not talking about you. Elikegon Rav Chanina of Rav Oshaya. Rather, the other 2 bachelors, Rav Chanina and Rav Oshaya. What was unique about them? The Gemara tells, Dahavu ushbechi ba'arad Yisrael. They were shoemakers in Eretz Yisrael. Dahavu yazbi b'shuka dezoinos. And they had their store in a area where there was many zonos, prostitutes. Va'avdeluhu mesan lezoinos. And they would make shoes even for the zonos. Who Vailin lahu, and these zonos came into their store, and indeed they provided them with the shoes. Inhu mistakli behu, these zonos looked at them. Ve'inhu loy medalon anayhu istakuli behu, but they didn't lift up their eyes to look at them. Umumsiyan hachi, misiu hachi, bechayen rabbonan kadish debar Yid Yisrael. When people would make a shvuah, they would make a shvuah about Rav Chanina and Rav Oshaya, and they would swear that on the Rabbanon, these holy Rabbanon of Eretz Yisrael. Gemara says, Shlosh HaKadosh Baruch Hu oyhavon. There are 3 that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves. Misha eino koyes, one who does not get angry. Misha eino mishtaker, somebody who does not get drunk. Somebody who does not, he's not particular, and therefore if somebody does something against him, he doesn't try to pay back, but rather he's mevater. We call ma'ivir al midoisov. Shloish HaKadosh Baruch Hu soinon. The opposite, there are 3 that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hate. Hamedaber echad ba'peh ve'echad ba'lev. One who speaks one way in his mouth, but he thinks otherwise in his heart. V'hayodeya Eidus bechaveiro ve'eno meid loy. Someone who has eidus to then say and testify against, but he doesn't do so. Ve'haroya davar erva bechaveiro meid ben bino bo yechidi. or somebody who sees a dvar erva in somebody else, that means that the person was choyte clearly, and he's made, but only by himself and individually. And we know a person to be giving edus has to be valid only when there's two. So the Gemara says, Ki hatuvia chata, tells a case of Tuvia, the person named Tuvia, he sinned. Ve'asa zigud lechudei ve'asid bei, kamed Rav Papa. And Zigud came alone and gave testimony in front of Rav Papa in his bezdin. Nagde le Zigud. Rav Papa, he flogged Zigud. Omar le, Zigud said to Rav Papa, Tuvia chata ve'zigud menagid. That means that he sinned, Tuvia, and I'm the one who gets flogged. Omar le, Rav Papa responded, yes. The Chsiv says in the Pasuk, Lo yakum eid echod bi'ish. One person should not get up and testify individually against somebody else. And you got up and you did testify against Tuvia. Shemra be'alma mafkas bei. You then only provided a moitzi shemra. And therefore, as the Pasuk says, Lo sochil rochil be'amecho, Lo selech rochil be'amecho, and therefore I came and flogged you. Om Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchok Marav. Mutter lisnoisoi, it's mutter to hate him. It's true, you can't testify as an individual, but it is mutter to hate him. Shenemar says, Kisire chamor soin acho, roivetz tachas maso. The Pasuk says, Paisah Mishpatim, that if you will see your enemy's chamor, it is struggling underneath its heavy load. So the Torah goes on to say, you should go ahead and help him. My soina, asked the Gemara, what is the soina that we're talking about here in the Pasuk? Ilema soina nachri. If you're talking about, it's a soina nachri. V'ha tanya, soina shamru, soina Yisrael, v'lo soina nachri. Here we're talking about soina Yisrael. Ela pshita soina Yisrael. Umisharya lemisnai. If it's indeed a soina Yisrael, who's to say you're allowed to hate a fellow Jew? V'aksiv, it said in the Pasuk, Lo sisnas achicha bilvavecha. You can't hate your fellow Jew in your heart. Elo, rather, di'iko sahadi da'ovid isura. Rather, that indeed there are witnesses seeing that he did an isur. The Gemara asks, if that's so, then kuliyama nam misni nasani le. Then everybody should hate him because he's somebody who's a rasha. Maishnohu. Hi, what's the difference of this one? That over here it's different. Over here you're allowed to sign to him. Elalav, it must be ki hai gavno. The chazi beiu dvar erva must be in this case where you saw a dvar erva that he did a certain chet. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok Omar mitzvah lisnoisai, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok adds it's a mitzvah. Not only are you allowed to, but it's a mitzvah to hate him. Shnei says Yiras Hashem soinei ra. It's a mitzvah Hashem, those who hate ra. Omar Rav Acha berei derov el Rav Ashi Mahu. Can you go ahead and tell over to his Rebbe that which he did for his Rebbe to hate him? In other words, you can't go ahead and testify, and you are allowed, it's even a mitzvah to hate him. Can you go ahead and tell his Rebbe that his Rebbe should hate him? Or Marley, he responded, he said, then leimalei. If you know that his Rebbe is going to then accept your words like two witnesses, then you can tell him. V'iloi loi leimalei. But if not, then you cannot say anything to him. Tanu Rabbanon. The Gemara brings up Brayso Shloisha Chayein Einam Chayim. There are three whose life is not a life. Harachmanin, Ve'haratchonin, Ve'aninei das. These three, when there's excessive, Rachmanis is good. Certainly, to have mercy is a wonderful trait. It's a trait of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and one has to have mercy. But one who has Rachmanis in an excessive way, that will cause him not to have Chayim. He won't have Menucha. V'harat Chanim, somebody who is going to be an angry fellow, that person, his Chayim Eino Chayim, again, he doesn't have any Menucha. And somebody's Aninei Hadas, he's so particular that he gets disgusted from everything. Again, such a person lacks menucha, and he also, his chayim is einam chayim. From Rav Yosef, kulu isnehu bi. Rav Yosef says all of these three things are in me. I have all of these characteristics. Ton Rabban, and the Gemara brings up Raisa. Shloisha soinin ze'etzeh. There are three that hate one another. Elu hein haklovim. Dogs, they hate one another. V'hatarnegolim, and the roosters hate one another. V'hachaborin, and these groups from the Chaborin, this nation that comes from Persia, they also hate one another. V'yeshoim af hazoinois. Some say even zoinois hate one another. V'yeshoim, I guess they're coming to then. They hate that the other one's going to take away from them, I guess. V'yeshoim af talmidei chachamim shebebavel. The talmidim chachamim that are even in Bavel have a certain bechina of hatred to say to one another, in the sense, not that they hate their fellow Jew, of course not, but in terms of there's a certain hatred that they possessed in regards to the learning that came out as a certain form of sina. Ton Rabbanon, it states in the Brisa, Shloisha oihavin ze et ze. There are three that love each other. Eluhein hagerim va'avodim va'orvin. The gerim love each other. They find commonality with one another. Va'avodim va'orvin, and the ravens. Arba eina das soivalton. There are four that one's das, one rational thinking is not able to understand. It's not able to be soival, to tolerate the following. And these are the following. Elohein dal goya. You have a poor person who's supposed to be humble and nichna, and instead he's arrogant. Ve'osher mechachish. An usher who's wealthy, somebody has a claim against him, a valid claim, and he denies it. One can't understand. That's not against the rational thinking. Why should this usher not then give what this person is due? V'zokei menaif. An elderly fellow who's menaif, he has adultery. Here a person is elderly and he's weak. He doesn't have the same desires as he once had, and he goes ahead and he's menaif. Uparnas misgal atzibur bechinam. Someone is a leader of the tzibur. All of his gedula comes from the tzibur, and when the tzibur needs him, he's not interested in helping them whatsoever. So therefore his geya, his gedula, his arrogance is something that results from the tzibur, and still he doesn't benefit the tzibur. There are those who say that even one who divorces his wife once and even twice and takes her back again and again. The Tanakama asked the Gemara, why doesn't Tanakama agree with this latter one and say that that's also something that the das cannot be soivel? Says the Gemara, the ksuvasa merupa. Maybe the ksuva sometimes is very much. He wrote a large ksuba and he cannot pay it back. So therefore he prefers to take her back as a wife and live with her, so he doesn't have to then pay such a heavy debt. Alternatively, he has children with her. So therefore that is also an incentive to then remarry her and then live with her together with the children. The Gemara goes on to say, Chamisha Dvarim Tziva Kenan es Bonov. Here is pointing out that it's not that necessarily that Kenan commanded his children, as it says literally over here, but rather the Hanhaga of the descendants of Kenan are such that as if Kenan commanded them. Take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam explains, Tziva Kenan es Bonov, Kloimar, Minhagan Kain, who? This was their minhag, the minhag of those descendants of Kenan. Ki'ilu Tziva alem avin, as if their father commanded them. V'nafka mino, shetzorech adam lizar mehen. The nafka mino would be, the difference would be to teach us that a person should be careful and wary of such descendants of Kenan. And what are these 5 things? Ehevu ze et ze. They love each other even though they are not behaving in the right way, but nonetheless they're told to ehevu ze et ze, to love one another. Ve'ehevu es hagazel, and to love theft. Ve'ehevu es hazima, and to love promiscuity. Ve'sinu es adonechem, and hate your masters. Ve'al tedabru emes, and do not speak the truth. So one has to be wary and stay far and clear from these descendants of Canaan. Shisha dvarim ne'emun besus. There are 6 things that are told about a horse. Oyeves haznus. It loves znus. Voyeves hamalchama. It loves war. It loves battle. Veruchoi gasa. It has spirit of arrogance. Umoyes is hashena, and it hates sleep, doesn't need sleep, and when it does sleep, it's very little. V'oichel harbe, eats a lot. Umoitzi kima, and only then extracts a little bit. Some say even it comes to kill the owner in its milchama when it needs to go to the bathroom and doesn't pay attention that it's in the middle of the war or the battle, so therefore the owner is then left to be killed in a dangerous situation. What's the nafka of all of these things? So if a person sells a horse and it wasn't stipulated in advance these things, it's still a good sale because it's understood that this is the characteristic of a horse. Shiva menudin l'shamayim. There are 7 things that are menudin of those who are going to be excommunicated from shamayim, and elu and these are them. Misha ein lo isha. Someone does not have children. Someone doesn't have a wife. Now here it's talking about where he's not interested in having a wife. He doesn't do any hishtadlus to have a wife. Similarly, v'sheish lo isha ve'ein lo bonim. He's married but doesn't have any children. Again, not because he's not able to, but rather he doesn't want. He doesn't have any to put any effort in hishtadlus to have children. Misha ein lo bonim ve'ein megadlen talmud Torah. Somebody who misha yesh lo bonim. Somebody who has children but he doesn't raise them to learn Torah. Umisha ein lo tefillin beroishu tefillin bezroya. Somebody who does not wear tefillin. That means the person who has tefillin is not wearing the tefillin. Somebody has a 4-cornered garment, he doesn't wear tzitzis on the corners of those garments. Tosfos says, some explain it to mean that a person who doesn't make himself chayiv to put on tzitzis, that means to say he doesn't wear a 4-cornered garment, or that he can then perform the mitzvah of tzitzis. Umezuzah bepischoi, doesn't put a mezuzah on the doorway of his door, or of the shar, of the gate. Somebody who holds back but does not put on shoes on his feet. In other words, he's expressing that Hakadosh Baruch Hu doesn't take care of all one's needs, as we say in the bracha in the beginning of the morning in Birkas HaShachar, she'asa li kol tzarki. Hakadosh Baruch Hu takes care of all the needs, including the shoes. And there are those that say, af mi she'ein musov, mesov, bechabura shel mitzvah. Somebody's not interested in sitting together with others in a suda shel mitzvah, like a bris milah. And therefore that person is also considered to be menudin min hashomayim.